The rain was coming down in sheets that night, bouncing off the cracked asphalt of the courthouse parking lot. A single security light flickered overhead, turning everything into a grainy black and white movie scene. Henry Carter, 68 years old and moving slow on a bad leg, stepped out of the courthouse, clutching a folder of documents against his chest. His cane hand-carved oak, worn smooth from decades of use, tapped a steady rhythm as he crossed the lot toward his beat-up Toyota. He didn't notice the cruiser parked under the far light until its headlights flared to life like search beams. Henry kept walking. Years in uniform had taught him that reacting too fast only made you look suspicious. He'd been a Marine drill instructor, a mentor to some of the toughest men and women this country ever produced. But tonight he wasn't thinking about that. He was thinking about the records he'd just pulled, proof that something ugly was festering in this sleepy little town. "Evening, old man," a voice called out. Officer Rick Dalton swung out of the cruiser, hand resting on his holster, a grin playing on his lips. He was built like a linebacker, early 30s, and carried himself with the swagger of a man who'd never been challenged. Henry turned, his expression calm. "Evening, officer," he said, voice low and even. "Just heading to my car." Dalton circled him like a wolf sizing up prey. "Little late to be hanging around government buildings, don't you think?" "What were you doing inside public records?" Henry replied simply. "Legal research," the officer chuckled, stepping closer, rain dripping off the brim of his cap. "Legal research? You a lawyer or something?" "No, sir," Henry said. "Retired military." The words didn't soften Dalton. They sharpened him. "Well, this ain't a base soldier, boy. Out here I make the rules." Henry stayed quiet, refusing to rise to the bait. That calmness, it irritated Dalton more than if he'd mouthed off. The young cop's grin hardened. "Turn around, hands on the car." Henry straightened, water dripping from his gray hair, his posture still military sharp, despite the pain in his leg. "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that I told you to." Dalton's voice dropped to that low, dangerous whisper that always comes before violence. "I haven't broken any law," Henry said. "Yeah." Dalton stepped in close, shoving him toward the cruiser. "Then maybe I'll find something." The impact rattled Henry's bones, but he stayed silent. Dalton cuffed him hard enough to cut off circulation, slammed him against the car roof, and leaned in. "You think you're special, huh? You're just another old man who doesn't know his place." Henry didn't flinch. He'd faced worse men in worse places. Dalton pulled his wallet, flipped it open, and sneered. "Maple Street, figures." He pocketed the ID without checking the military cards inside. Then, just to twist the knife, he picked up Henry's cane, examined the craftsmanship, and smashed it against the pavement until it splintered. Henry watched through the rain-slicked window as the cop kicked the pieces under his cruiser. Dalton climbed back in and drove him to the station, smug as ever. The cell was cold, lit by flickering fluorescent lights. Henry sat on the narrow bench, wrists raw, rain still dripping from his jacket. He closed his eyes, steadying his breath. His mind cataloged every detail: badge number, vehicle ID, camera placement. He'd trained soldiers to stay calm in interrogation, to remember everything, because someday that knowledge could save lives. He didn't know it yet, but that lesson was about to save his own. By dawn, the video of his arrest, filmed by a courthouse security cam, was already spreading through private military channels. At Fort Jackson, Captain Marcus Reed was midway through a morning briefing when his phone buzzed. He froze, watching his old mentor, his master Sergeant Carter, get shoved into a squad car like a criminal. Marcus didn't hesitate. He sent the clip to a group chat that had been silent for years, one that connected men and women who'd been hammered into steel under Carter's watch. Within hours, those silent soldiers were moving like clockwork. Calls went out from Germany, Japan bases stateside. Agents in intelligence circles cleared schedules. By lunchtime, there were federal attorneys, FBI field officers, and a handful of quiet men in civilian clothes en route to a small town in Pennsylvania. The man who had forged America's most elite warriors had been humiliated, and they were coming for blood. Back at the Millbrook Police Department, Sergeant Linda Porter looked up from her desk as Dalton strutted in with his perp. She'd been on the force 20 years and recognized a bad arrest the second she saw one. Henry met her gaze, calm and unbroken. She typed his name into the system, spotless record. Dalton smirked over her shoulder. "First time for everything." Linda kept her mouth shut. She knew pushing back would only paint a target on her back. She just processed him quietly and let him sit in the cell while Dalton bragged to his buddies in the break room. That night, Claudia Vega walked through the station doors. Civil rights attorney's sharp suit, calm demeanor that carried authority. Behind her were two men built like tanks, both scanning exits out of habit. She showed her credentials to Detective Raymond Holt, one of the few honest cops left. "I'm here for Henry Carter," she said, "and I'd like to see the arrest report and any video evidence." Holt hesitated, then glanced toward Dalton's empty desk. He leaned in close. "You might want more than the report." Within minutes, he was handing Claudia a folder thick with records, years of complaints, buried fabricated charges, extortion schemes tied to the mayor's office. "This isn't one bad cop," Holt said quietly. "It's a network. Been running this racket for years. They targeted the wrong man tonight." Claudia's jaw tightened. "Then let's make them regret it." Calls flew up the chain. The Pentagon, the Justice Department, the FBI Civil Rights Division. By 3 a.m., a plan was in motion. And at sunrise, Millbrook woke up to a scene straight out of a Hollywood thriller. Black SUVs rolled into town in a perfect convoy, their government plates gleaming under the streetlights. 4 surrounded the police station. 4 more boxed in City Hall. The last group parked outside Mayor Dennis Rollins' sprawling home. Agents in tactical gear poured out, efficient and silent, moving like a well-oiled machine. Inside the station, Sergeant Porter barely had time to stand before a federal marshal laid a warrant on her desk. "We're here for Henry Carter," the woman said firmly, "and for Officer Rick Dalton." Dalton never saw it coming. Agents grabbed him at his apartment, still in sweatpants, mid-coffee sip. By the time he realized what was happening, he was in cuffs, being read charges for conspiracy, extortion, and civil rights violations. Henry watched from his cell as Captain Marcus Reed walked in. No uniform, but that military bearing was unmistakable. Master Sergeant Marcus said softly, unlocking the door. "Did you really think we'd let you sit in here alone?" Henry stood slowly, surprise flashing across his face. "Marcus, I told you all to focus on your missions." Marcus smiled. "This is the mission." Outside, reporters were already filming the chaos. Cameras caught Dalton being led out in cuffs, looking small and terrified, a far cry from the man who'd strutted like he owned the town. Within hours, the story exploded, decorated veteran brutalized by small-town police, triggering a federal crackdown. Social media lit up with photos of Henry calm and dignified, flanked by soldiers he'd once trained. By noon, the mayor was under arrest, the police chief was in custody, and FBI agents were carrying out boxes of evidence from City Hall. The investigation uncovered everything: a pay-to-play racket targeting minority business owners, fabricated charges to extort money, a web of corruption stretching years back. 6 months later, Henry Carter sat in a federal courtroom, the same jacket he had worn that rainy night, now pressed and clean. He took the stand steady and composed and told the jury exactly what had happened. He spoke of dignity, of the oath he'd taken to protect his country, of the irony of being treated like a criminal in the land he'd fought for. "Why didn't you just comply?" The defense attorney sneered. Henry looked him dead in the eye. "Because I spent 20 years teaching soldiers to defend their rights, not surrender them." The courtroom erupted in applause before the judge restored order. The verdicts came fast and hard. Dalton, 25 years without parole. The chief, 15. The mayor, 18, and forfeiture of all assets. The town of Millbrook was gutted, rebuilt under federal oversight, and became a national example of reform. Henry never asked for recognition, but it came anyway. The Pentagon honored him with the Distinguished Civilian Service Award. Veterans he'd trained showed up from all over the world. At the ceremony, Marcus leaned over and whispered, "You know why we came, right? You taught us to never leave a man behind." Henry chuckled softly. "I guess I'm glad you listened." But that night, back at his quiet house, he sat alone and thought about the broken cane, the humiliation of those cuffs biting into his wrists. Justice had been served, yes, but it had taken an army to make it happen. How many others had suffered in silence because they didn't have soldiers and spies and lawyers in their corner? That's the thing about stories like Henry's. They shine a light, but they also leave a shadow. So tell me, what do you think? Was the system fixed that day, or did it just bend because one man had powerful friends? Have you ever seen someone abused by authority because they looked powerless? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share your stories. And if you believe in justice, hit like, subscribe, and help us keep these voices alive. Because one day it might be your voice that needs to be heard.